1967 saw Denny driving for Bruce in McLaren's assault on Can-Am, the Canadian-American sports car series, where the engines were enormous, and so was the prize money.
When the Can-Am series was announced, the prize money was huge by standards of the day. So it became an area they could get involved in where they had a very good chance, if successful, of helping raise some funding for the team.
With McLaren designed and built sports cars, they took America by storm. In what came to be called the Bruce and Denny Show, they won the series for 4 consecutive years and became household names. Of all their Can-Am victories, the greatest must have been Mosport in 1967.
McLaren is off, flat out. Over half a lap back and no one in sight.
Problems with fuel forced Bruce to start from the back of the field.
McLaren seems to choose any line in a daring drive rarely seen in motor racing.
He fought his way through the pack to come second.
Hulme is in trouble.
Denny, who'd spun off, drove on to first place on just 3 wheels.
His tire is smoking badly. The crumpled fender burning away at the rubber. A half a mile from pay dirt, Hulme struggles on. The burned out wheel locked in place. A fantastic finish to an always unpredictable race. Bruce McLaren completes the 200 miles just 35 seconds behind.
Oh, it was just wonderful, really. All the Can-Am races were absolutely just magical. And there were so many interesting people involved, like Paul Newman and various film stars, Steve McQueen, who we were lucky enough to get to know. It was just great.
Really and truly, Can-Am was a big deal in the United States. There's no question about that.
One particular year, I think they won every race in the series, but there were a lot of races that they only just won.
The team and the 2 drivers were treated as international race drivers and or heroes.
On occasions in the Can-Am series, we'd end up staying when I was Ferrari and they were doing their thing. We'd end up with rooms in the same motel complex, and I think some of their after-match functions were pretty good.
And I'm doing all the washing, and I'm thinking, my goodness, how can he get these overalls so dirty, not knowing that he'd been skidding down the road upside down in the Can-Am car. And it wasn't until I read the Autosport later that week that he'd never mentioned that he'd rotated in the air and gone down the road.
Denny very much got thrust into the limelight and he hated it.
And the driver of number 5, New Zealander Denny Hulme, is the point leader and the man that everyone is trying to catch.
If Denny was trying to avoid publicity, he went the wrong way about it.
Where do you think you got your most valuable experience?
Obviously being with a big works team like Brabham's, and now with Bruce, McLaren's team, who are well organised and well up to date with everything.
But as a driver, you
Denny being so modest, fame and attention really weren't words that were in his vocabulary.
Journalists christened him the Bear because of his intimidating nature.
He got that gruff exterior because they can be very pushy and sort of invasive, and so perhaps he sort of snarled a bit to sort of keep them away.
To this day, I don't know the question that he asked Dennis. It was something like, doesn't it scare you out there, or something like that. Equally inane. And Dennis looked straight through him, straight through to me, and he said, Ian, he said, will you tell us, stop asking such stupid questions? Turned on his heel and walked straight into the motorhome. I thought, oh my God, there's my job gone. The interviewer is in tears. And as I went into the motorhome to say, Dennis, what are you doing? You're ruining this whole thing. And he was sitting back in the chair like this, laughing his head off. He said, oh, come on, Ian. He said, I was just getting his attention.
The lifestyle competing in Can-Am, Formula One, IndyCar racing was pretty hectic. At times, Bruce said the only sleep he got was when he was travelling on the plane.
Any of those programs on their own would have been a fairly major undertaking. But the team was very well organised. I don't think there were any weaknesses in any particular area of the whole team.
How many miles has it done?
It's done 560 miles.
The growing McLaren team started taking on a distinctly New Zealand flavour.
As Kiwis arrived in England, they would call in at New Zealand House and then ring McLaren's and turn up out there and say, have you got any work?
Being a New Zealander was as important as being a good mechanic, because he figured he could train, he could make a mechanic into a good mechanic, or a good mechanic into an engineer.
I mean, Bruce had this very infectious sort of cheerfulness and enthusiasm.
To me, the most important point about Bruce being a motivator is everybody liked the guy so much, had so much respect for him, that he never ever had to, in all of the years we were together, ask anybody to do anything.
He just treats you well and respects your opinion. Doesn't try and tell you what to do all the time. He's willing to let you use a bit of initiative.
It only took a few years before the majority of the team were New Zealanders.
McLaren's first Formula One cars had major motor problems, but by 1968 they were a serious threat to the top teams.
Both McLarens are going like a bomb. It must have seemed like that when a lens of Hulme's goggles was shattered by a stone. It nearly knocked him out, but he kept going, recovered the lead and held it. In third place, New Zealand's Chris Amon in a Ferrari, number 20. So it's first three places to New Zealanders, with Denny Hulme leading them home.
Many times during that season, the Kiwi trio could be seen in the top placings.
This year, the honours go to New Zealand. With all the big names in the field, 3 New Zealanders are to finish among the first 4.
Well, Chris was always known as the party boy. If there was a party, Chris would be there.
We always used to say he should have been sponsored by Gordon's Gin. Provided you could get up in the morning, you were fit enough to drive a race car. But that was probably a challenge to a few of them, getting up in the morning.
I can certainly remember one or two very good parties after races.
Well, he was a flirt, of course, when he was younger. Loved the ladies.
He didn't want to go into a monastery to make his point.
Well, if you're driving for Ferrari and living in Italy, you can live like a royalty.
You would think that Enzo Ferrari, he would want to know every last detail about the car and its performance and the power of the engine and all this. He said, no, he said he just wanted to know what his latest girlfriend had done in bed the night before. He was always more interested in the gossip than ever he was in the cars.
He had a keen interest. He also had a superb intelligence network too when it came to that. In fact, I sometimes think he knew more what we were doing than we did.
Then the race became a tremendous duel between Chris Amon's Ferrari, number 5, and Siffert's Lotus. Amon battling to get past. But the Swiss driver holds him off and breaks the lap record to win by only 7 seconds.
Despite qualifying on the front row for 7 out of 10 Grand Prix, a Formula One win still eluded Chris.
We had these tear-off things that attached to the visor, and when they got covered in oil, you'd peel one off and you had clear vision again. I was leading with about 4 laps to go, I think, or even might have been 3 laps to go. And peeled the tear-off off and peeled the whole visor off, and suddenly I got a 200-mile-an-hour blast of wind in my face and finished a very gentle 7th or 8th, I think.
But it wasn't just bad luck. The Ferraris he'd driven in Europe habitually let him down, failing to finish in 7 Grand Prix. But back home in the Tasman Series, they performed.
The cars we used out here in the Tasman were basically Formula 2 cars with a bigger engine in them and far more reliable than the Formula 1 cars were.
Consequently, he won the 1968 New Zealand Grand Prix.
Oh, it was very nice to win at home. But at the time, it was very nice to win anywhere, I'd have to say, because we weren't having the greatest run.
In 1969, Chris won both the New Zealand and Australian Grand Prix. To accomplish this, he had to beat 4 recent world champions. He'd vindicated himself as a driver. 1969 had become one of Chris's best years. It was also one of McLaren's busiest. the team Bruce had founded was becoming the biggest in the world.
Each year it gets a little harder to keep everything as neatly and as nicely controlled as we did in previous years, because there is just that much more administration, there is that much more to go wrong.
When they decided to attempt Indianapolis, some wondered if they were extending themselves too far.